The economy could be improved strictly by just going back to a free market economy. We have spent too much, we have borrowed too much, we have inflated too much, we regulate too much, and we overtax. So we get into a predictable crisis. The free market, Austrian economists were very much aware of the financial bubbles coming and expecting these bubbles to burst, whether it was the NASDAQ bubble or the housing bubble. So these predictions were all there. But the whole idea that if we can predict bubbles and see them coming by too much spending, too much debt, too much borrowing, too much inflation, too many regulations, how in the world can we expect to think we can get out of that mess by spending more money and borrowing more money and printing more money and regulating more money? And then they wonder why the recession hasn't ended. It's been 4 years now. Matter of fact, the slump in the growth in our economy is probably about 14 years now. As we see all through the first decade of this century, since the NASDAQ bubble burst in the year 2000, we have not had significant economic growth. We have not produced any significant number of industrial jobs. And this is why young people, you finish college, you have a degree, you have a lot of debt, and you can't get a job. So this is just not theoretical. This is very practical, and we have to understand how we get ourselves into this kind of a mess. And so we can't do the same thing over and over again and expect to get different results. So what do we need to do? We have to really, once again, address the subject of monetary policy. Nobody else is talking about this, and yet it's vital. I need to say nobody, and that means the other politicians, the people in Washington, the other candidates. But I'll tell you what, I know when I go to the campuses, they know exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the Federal Reserve System and why we need to reassess, audit the Federal Reserve, and someday get rid of the Federal Reserve. I know you know. They would like to make us think that we are going back to the Dark Ages, arguing the case for limited government and the Constitution and the gold standard. They say that's all old-fashioned. But let me tell you what is really old-fashioned. That's tyranny, big government, control of the people, the undermining of personal. That is what old-fashioned. In the course of history, freedom is a relatively new idea, and it was best tested in this country, but our experiment was very successful, yet we still rejected it. My theory on that is what happens is the freer a country, the wealthier a country, the more production. The more it's socialized or more dictatorship you have, the poorer the country. So as we benefited from these tremendous amount of freedoms and we became very prosperous, we became very sloppy in understanding nor defending the principles that allow the production to occur. You know, the sound money, the free markets, and limited government. So what we did, we concentrated on material wealth and materialism, and what we did was we encouraged people to concentrate on forced redistribution. Become a good lobbyist, go to Washington, get what you want, and all across the board. And this is essentially what campaigns have been all about for decades now. It isn't so much change in policy. The parties haven't said, well, let's change the foreign policy. Let's just say, well, I might invade this country, but not this country, and I'd do this more so. It's not a change in foreign policy. They don't talk about change in monetary policy. They don't talk about enforcing contracts rather than letting the government interfere with contracts. They're not talking about deregulation. You elect Republicans, and we had a crisis 10 years ago with Enron, and the Republicans gave us Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley was a regulatory bill that has cost the economy $1 trillion in the last 10 years. So there's no difference in this is what we have to realize, that if we change it, we can get our economic growth again, because this is what is on the people's mind. But it isn't so simple. As long as we have a society which concentrates only on material benefits but not those principles, all it does is you create this havoc in Washington. You have people, the lobbyists coming, and especially when there's clawing away at redistribution. And that worked for a while because the pie was bigger and actually growing. But now, today, because of the monetary system changes, over-regulation over debt, the pie is shrinking and shrinking. Does that wise everybody up and say, oh, we've made a mistake, we got to have economic growth again? No. the special interests become more aggressive. They keep clawing and clawing, and the two parties too often will argue over power and who gets the loot that they have stolen and how they pass it out. But that isn't the answer. The answer is freedom and productivity and energy and rewards for hard work and effort, and emphasizing the fact that you have a right not only to your life and liberty, but you ought to have a God-given right to keep the fruits of all your labors. Good news is a lot of people are waking up to this, and they want this, and they're energized to it, but the people in Washington haven't heard the message. So your message, our message, if this is your message, you want it, we have to shout it loud and clear, because Washington, they're still sound asleep, and the people who have been engulfed in that system and other candidates are just not aware of your concerns about the foreign policy and the monetary policy and the cutting of spending. Nobody else is talking about cutting spending. They're talking about cutting proposed increases. The baseline budget goes raising the spending level by $10 trillion over the next 10 years. So they say, we're going to cut the budget by $1 trillion. $1 trillion over 10 years. And it's not a cut. It's just, it's deception is what it is. Now, if you look at a $1 trillion cut over 10 years is $100 billion cut every year. It used to be a lot of money, but it's not much more. It's not much, especially when it's just cutting proposed increases. Now, our national debt is going up $100 billion every month in real terms. So that's how far they are removed from reality. My attempt is to get people back to admit the truth, get back to reality, and if we get to that point, what we need to do the very first year we're in charge is cut the budget in real terms by $1 trillion.